The capital squatters claimed they were exercising their First Amendment right. This amendment, which was ratified with 9 others in 1791, forms part of what became known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Do you know the context in which this document was created?
No?
No? Shall we go to class today?
When we talk about independence from the United States, we are usually led to think that it was an independence similar to the Brazilian one.
A dissatisfaction caused a colony to revolt against metropolitan oppression and become independent, even if it had to go to war to gain freedom.
However, we have to pay attention to small detail. There were 13 colonies that enjoyed autonomy and not a colony with a centralized administration. The struggle for independence created a fragile unity. In fact, the Declaration of Independence itself did not generate the constitution of a legal entity that we could call a state. In 1777, exactly the year after the Declaration of Independence, the so-called Articles of Confederation were approved, which guaranteed sovereignty for the 13 colonies, in the form of a confederate state.
The Patriots' concentration of forces launches the idea of a stronger state, by purifying its unity in the so-called union of a true homeland in America.
But what kind of state would be most suitable?
What would each of the colonies gain or lose for this state to be formed?
Was it necessary for the former colonies to lose their sovereignty and become just autonomous entities of a federation?
Would America be the land of freedom, or would that freedom remain threatened, seeing only the replacement of an oppressive state in Europe by an oppressive state in America? The War of Independence ended in 1781. England recognized independence through the Treaty of Paris in 1783, but formally, by jury, it had not yet been defined. Even with the ratification of the Articles of Confederation in 1781, unity was fragile and only needed to occur in war or emergency situations.
The only unifying institution would be the so-called Continental Congress.
I can tell you that it was real chaos. 7 of the 13 former colonies printed their own money. 9 of them had their own navy.
Imagine what it was like. Think of the chaos, but also think of the sense of freedom these states felt.
It is in this context that the United States would be formed, which was born with the Constitution of 1787, which was ratified in 1788. But how did this Constitution arrive, and how were the debates that took place from its elaboration to its ratification?
The self-administration of the ex-colonies needed an executive, which was really centered in the legislative power, and this went against Montesquieu's ideals of the tripartition of powers. As I mentioned the French Enlightenment, let's talk about the American Enlightenment.
When we talk about the American Constitution, some Enlightenment-based intellectuals are unavoidable, who were responsible for the debates that would lead both to the 1787 Constitution and would reinforce its approval. And then the highlight goes to James Madison, Alexander Hamilton and George Washington, who would be the first American president.
It is at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 that the first and only American constitutional charter is born. The convention was intended only to reform articles of the Confederation, but ends up creating something new instead of patching up something old. The Constitution of the United States of America was born, which would still generate deep and heated debates, since different states had their proposals and their objections. Several important points emerged from these debates. For example, the southern states with a predominance of slavery have a relatively small number of citizens, which would affect their representativeness. The 3/5 rule was created, which counted for every 5 slaves, 3 citizens were counted.
And the small states, in this case, would have fewer deputies to represent them. What was the solution?
The Senate was created, with a fixed number of senators for each state, regardless of size.
That is, it sought to circumvent the objections with the aim of consolidating the federative model. Those who demanded the maintenance of sovereignty for the states were called Anti-Federalists. Those who defended only autonomy for the parties were the Federalists. Although the Constitution was ready, it needed to be ratified.
And it is at this point that the debates become more intense. It was at this moment that a series of articles published in the New York press between 1787 and 1788 gained prominence. These articles were signed by publics, with pseudonyms used by James Madison, Alexander Muto and John Jay. These historical documents,
which went down in history as the Federalist Papers, sought to demonstrate in detail the disadvantages of the confederative system, as well as the advantages of the federal state form that was being envisaged in the 1787 Constitution. The 83 articles were essential for reaching a certain consensus, which guaranteed the ratification of the American Constitution in 1788. However, as the old saying goes, a scalded cat is afraid of ugly water. The Anti-Federalists were not entirely convinced. The public theorization that the Union of Federated States would be the guarantor of rights and freedoms seemed like a blank check, which they did not feel safe to sign.
This state, once strengthened, will want to repeat the same authoritarianism that the English tried to impose on their colonies. It is in this context that they demand a series of conditional guarantees that guarantee the defense of citizens against state action.
Anti-Federalists accept ratification of the Constitution as long as these rights are introduced into the Constitution as amendments. It was there that the first 10 amendments were born that would become known as 𝗡𝗶𝘃𝗃 or Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen.
I'm going to present some of these amendments so that you can see how the trauma with the English is very evident. Congress shall make no law enacting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise of one, or encroaching upon freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for the redress of grievances. This is the famous First Amendment. It was exactly this First Amendment that was evoked by the demonstrators who invaded the Capitol and who felt wronged by the results of the elections.
Let's go to the second.
The security of a free state and the existence of a well-organized militia being necessary, the right of the people to keep and bear arms may not be infringed. This Second Amendment is one of the most debated in American society to date, which lately has reached even Brazil.
Shall we go third?
No soldier should, in time of peace, be lodged in any house without the owner's consent, nor in time of war, except as prescribed by law.
The Third Amendment clearly shows the desire that a law such as the Bill of Quarters, which had been imposed by the English on the colonists, would never be repeated. Let's go here on the Fifth Amendment.
No person shall be held to answer for a capital or other disgraceful crime except on indictment or indictment before a grand jury, except in cases arising in the naval or land forces or in the militia when on actual duty, in a situation of war or public danger.
Nor may any person be tried twice for the same crime, the conviction of which may lead to capital punishment or imprisonment, nor be compelled to serve as a witness in any criminal case against him, nor be deprived of life, liberty or property, without due process of law, nor may private property be expropriated for public use without just compensation.
The inhibition of certain rights in the Constitution should not be interpreted as a denial or restriction of other rights inherent to the people. That's why here in Brazil, when we want to talk about rights, we talk about articles, because Article 5 of the 𝗡-88 guarantees us that right. There in the United States, they refer to the famous amendments. If you like this video, leave a comment, give it a like. This is very important for the channel and encourages me to make more videos like this.
Okay guys, big hug.